This is Chris Oatley's ArtCast, episode 69, Breaking In at Riot Games, and How to Get a Concept Art Internship, an interview with Chris Campbell. With musical guest, Matt the Electrician.
Dear Customer Complaint Department, I have nothing to complain about. In fact, I have nothing but good things to say about your company today. Let me begin by saying that normally I avoid your store like the plague. But recently on a drive to Dallas, my car broke down on the side of the road. In West Texas, not the direction, but the town called West. It was the battery. I got a jump start for free with my AAA card. But the local mom and pop garage were unfortunately unable to assuage my electrical conundrum, cause my car is not American made. So still running from my earlier jump start, I drove on down the road for the first time in my life, praying that I'd see a Walmart. Now normally your store's like a virus, like Miley Cyrus in a teen magazine, every 5 miles on the road, like a toad, a monstrous amphibian on the horizon, entirely blocking out the sun. But today Murphy's Law was riding shotgun, I didn't see one for 47.5 miles. And as I drove into Lancaster, Texas, an alabaster albatross arose out of the darkness, and I cried tears of joy as I drove around the back to the tire and lube garage. And I jumped out with my car still running. I asked a jumpsuited employee if he could change my battery, but he didn't have a smile for me. He said 45-minute wait, but in 45 minutes I was going to be late to my very first show at Uncle Calvin's Coffee House at a church in northeast Dallas. So I stood under the late afternoon sun. On the hot asphalt, my car continued to run, and I thought, this is the end of the line. I was running out of gas and running out of time, figuring I'd finish my days in a Walmart parking lot in a heat stroke case, when an angel appeared at my side, and her name tag read Angela. She had pity in her eyes. She said, pull into bay number 2 and pop your hood, and I'll see what I can do. And she examined the dimensions of my battery, said, yeah, I think we have that, I'll go get it for you. And the sun began to feel like my friend, and when she returned she had tools to lend. And Angela and I worked side by side, as though we'd worked together since the dawn of time. And 5 minutes later, when I tried to pay her, she said, pay for the battery, but you don't owe me anything. And as I turned to leave, she said, write a letter to Walmart and tell them what you think of me. So dear Customer Complaint Department, I have nothing to complain about. In fact, I have nothing but good things to say. And please pass on my thanks to Angela today, and you should give her a raise and let her unionize. Sincerely, Matt.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of Chris Oatley's ArtCast. I'm Chris Oatley, and I was a character designer and visual development artist at Disney until I left to pursue my passion for teaching. I founded the Oatley Academy of Concept Art and Illustration in August of 2012 with the mission to create the most personal art education you can find online. A community of focused, passionate artists has been gathering there ever since. Visit my website, chrisoatley.com, that's ChrisoAtley.com, to find hundreds of free resources designed to help you make a living from your imagination. You'll also get my free digital painting kit when you subscribe to my email newsletter. That includes 4 sets of custom Photoshop brushes in my email series called The Key to Great Paintings. Go to digitalpaintingkit.com to learn more. Most professional artists have been drawing since they first picked up a crayon. As a kid, Chris Campbell drew the occasional doodle, but he never took his art seriously. Not until his late 20s, anyway. Abandoning his career as a journalist, Chris enrolled in his local art college, and he landed a concept art internship at Riot Games just 3 years later. When his internship wrapped, Chris had to inform his teachers back home that he would not be returning for his senior year, because the team at Riot had hired him. Chris Campbell went from total beginner to one of the most coveted concept art gigs in just 3 years. Who is this guy? In this interview, Chris shares his passion, his paradigm, and the story of his rapid career change. You can find Chris Campbell's blog at stosart.blogspot.com. That's stosart.blogspot.com. Stick around after the interview for another song by Matt the Electrician, and you can find his website at matttheelectrician.com. In this episode, we talk a lot about how reading informs your art and helps you to find your own visual voice. Well, Chris was kind enough to compile a list of his top 15 non-art books that every artist should read, and we've made that available for download on the website as a free PDF. You can find the link at chrisoatley.com/EP69. Again, that's chrisoatley.com/EP69, as in episode 69. So go, download the reading list, and then go find your library card.
You're a very thoughtful guy, and you think about all the mechanics of breaking in and the way the industry works and what motivates people, and this is stuff you spend your thought life on. Where did that come from? How did you become so contemplative, and how has that benefited you?
Wow, that's I feel like I have to have like a really good answer to that question. I guess from the base of it or whatever would be that I think like a lot of artists we're fairly observant and introspective about what we see, because that feeds what we then return to the world in a way. So I think that's kind of one of those things that you can't lay claim to as much as it's just sort of kind of a part of who you are. I was like this kid that would sit there and think about stuff. So I always got that old soul thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that leads into it, but I've always sort of been empathetic.
Are you a reader?
Yeah, I read a lot.
I find that old souls and introspective artists are often readers, but I think reading helps to make an empathetic artist and a thoughtful artist.
Yeah, well, because you're basically getting a chance to take like a master interpreter of the world. When they're constructing a character, you're getting kind of their technique into like how they break it down.
Yeah.
So a lot of reading, I think, does help that. I actually also spent a couple years as a journalist, so I had time to do a lot of question asking.
And you have to figure out how to ask good questions.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Now, what was that all about?
I'll try to give like a really quick version of I guess how I got here, because I'm 32 and just finishing up school, so I'm like 10 years older than most people in this same situation, and those 10 years will have made a lot of difference, because you just go out and live and you make mistakes and you goof off and you do dumb things and you kind of like get a chance to learn from them. But so I actually drew a lot as a kid, but I never thought about doing it to make money or be good enough to make money. So then I go through high school and I go into college, and I'm basically like...
Did you keep drawing?
Not really.
Yeah.
I sort of, after high school, I sketched a little bit in college, but it was more doodles. I mean, I think there's like that difference between sketching and just doodling.
Right.
So it was more like that kind of stuff. And I'm in college, and I basically became an English major by way of being a history major and a pre-law major for like one afternoon. when I didn't take long to be like, ooh, that's not me. But so I had a great teacher in high school that was a really great storyteller. He was a history teacher, and I loved story. He went so in depth behind just the characters of history. So I went to college, and I'm like, well, history is what I want, because he was a history teacher. And, you know, you can see sort of like, oh, you could go be a teacher or do something, whatever. So I did that for a while, and it was really dry and boring, and I realized that it wasn't the history, it was the story.
Yeah.
So then eventually I became an English major with a creative writing focus. Unless you do want to teach, or unless you're like just an amazing like creative writer, or you have some sort of amazing like
David Sedaris.
Yeah, like you're just
Sarah Vowell.
Yeah, like you're just one of the like lucky ones, I guess. You're basically just, you know, unemployed. So I kind of bounced around to different jobs. I've been a bartender. I've been a wallpaper hanger. I've been I painted houses. I've done all kinds of different stuff. And eventually all that time I was writing, though. I'm sorry, in my 20s, I was just writing, but not really drawing at all.
Writing journalistic stuff?
No, actually, primarily writing like poetry, writing short stories. I had a few like poems get published in some small literary magazines, but there was a ton of writing that went into that to get like, you know, a couple little things. And I'm not saying they were good or anything. Just,
right. Who were you? Who were your influences then? Who were you looking at that you were going like, oh, that seems like a cool idea to write?
Yeah. Well, actually, I started out with Hemingway. I think a lot of people do, and I still like admire him very much. I've grown, you know, being 20 years old and reading like that sort of like bravado-filled, short, like kind of like super macho kind of style. But I look at him differently now. Yeah. But you know, that's kind of like those stories, though. His stories are kind of what's got me going.
Well, and it's so visual. That's what I love.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So there's so much imagery, which I feel like is largely lost in fiction.
Yeah,
today.
But it's clean.
Yeah.
He uses like no adjective. I mean, he uses some, but there are almost none. He just says green hills, but he drops them in the background, and there's a conversation in the foreground, and suddenly like your mind just like builds these little mountains back there. You're focused on a story between two 1920s people that drink and smoke too much, and you know what I mean, whatever it is, and you get this whole setting out of 2 or 3 sentences with like maybe 1 or 2 adjectives out of all of that.
Wow.
So he was really inspiring, and this is also, again, breaking him down now is not the way that I would have then. I was just like, how do you do that? You just write with like no adjectives, and you just like hammer out like, you know, if the word has more than 7 letters, it's too long. Like, you know, you just.
It is amazing how we turn everything into rules.
Mm-hmm.
I not to get off track here, but this brings to mind something that I've had a few students reach out to me recently and say something back to me that I said was working, and so maybe we were in a critique, or I was just in a conversation with them or something, and I mentioned something that was working well in another piece. Okay, and then they approached me, and then they're like, I've been trying to do that thing that you said was done well, or whatever. And I'm like, all right, first of all, thank you for listening.
Yeah, right.
But be careful, just because something worked in one context doesn't mean that's like, oh, this is what you always do.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't mean you always do that.
Right.
It just means that, look, that one piece was one small part of a big solution that became a painting that kind of worked.
Yeah, because then you get hung up on like recreating that.
Exactly.
And it's like that creative energy sort of falls to the wayside, and you're just like, I need to hit that mark.
So back to Hemingway or any visual artist that has good work. So that's what craft is. So craft is this sort of hybrid of subconscious or unconscious application of the fundamentals. So mastery of the fundamentals, I guess. You can do it without thinking about it. Mastery of the fundamentals crossed with heart and intent. You know, and I think that's where you find that balance. That's where you find yourself as an artist of any kind.
Are you verging on appeal?
Yeah, and I think that's what people relate to. And although it's not, appeal is a crowd pleaser, whereas what I'm talking about in finding it's more of an identity thing.
Yeah.
Hemingway had a very strong identity.
Right.
I mean, he had something that he was very convinced on what that he was going to communicate to the world, and yet at the same time, there's still a very strong craft. It's not like. It's not like you read his stuff and it's so experimental that it doesn't make sense anymore.
Right, absolutely.
You know, it's still words on a page, and just like you were saying, there's even a reductive approach to some of his work.
Right.
So Yeah, so that's the craft part. I mean,
Yeah.
or that rather, should I say, that's the fundamentals part.
Right.
I'm deciding what fundamentals I'm going to use, what influences I'm going to use, but then the heart part is what kind of creates that your individual craft.
Right. That's if there's truth behind the art,
Right.
it'll resonate.
Exactly.
And if you're writing about something you don't know, like even like science fiction, things like that, those characters are real people.
Yeah.
And if you're like, so yeah, of course, like you've never been to Jupiter and seen like a ship come back from a black hole, like Event Horizon or
Right,
something. Like
exactly.
nobody's seen that.
Yeah.
But the characters and the emotional and psychological things happening to them, that resonates. So then you can put them in like whatever crazy environment you want, but that has to be there. Those characters have to feel true or whatever. And I think that's really hard to find too.
Yeah.
It's hard to recognize what you can speak truly about.
Oh yeah.
Like I found that was part of my whole journey as a writer thing. I guess to get back to that.
Right. No adjectives.
Yeah. I don't want to I like adjectives. Adjectives are good.
They're fine.
They're awesome. Yeah, so he wasn't like my only influence though, right? There were Tim O'Brien is a great one.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote The Things They Carried, which is it's a Vietnam, it's a book, a bunch of short stories about like a platoon in Vietnam, and they're not consecutive, like they all tell the same like a timeline thing, but they're all about like this group of guys, and he's one of the most amazing writers that I've come across too. Anyway, there's tons of them. I read Joyce. The Dead by James Joyce is probably my favorite short story, or maybe my favorite story, because it's so boring, yet I want to read it again.
Huh.
You know what I mean? Like you're like, gosh, why do I want to read that again? But you're just, because you keep mining it for those like observations and things he makes. And how does he turn a tone? It's crazy. So, but it's admittedly boring. I'm not saying you're going to go out and be like, yes, this is awesome.
But it is a short
You're probably going to be
story.
like, what did I just read? Yeah. So all this time, though, I was focused on writing. And I was writing short stories, poetry for a number of years. And I was doing all these like odd jobs. And eventually I sort of kicked myself in gear, and I was like, well, how do I write for a living? Because that's what I've spent all this time trying to do. And so I went into journalism, just a small paper here in Columbus. And I did that for 2+ years. And that was okay. That was good. I was happier there than I was in anything else, because there was some creative license. Although in journalism, you have a lead paragraph that is literally like an inch and a half. And any kind of creativity is like right there.
Yeah.
So that was cool. And I felt more rewarded on a day-to-day basis, but still wasn't quite it. And
Forces you to be efficient.
Yeah. Brevity becomes a real thing.
Yeah.
But basically, my dad passed away while I was a journalist, and I've been doing this whole thing where I've been like, I want to be a writer, and I'm going to write these short stories, and I'm going to write this book. And you keep telling yourself that you're going to climb that next branch tomorrow or the next branch after that, and you're going to get there someday. But that day doesn't come. That day wasn't coming for me.
Right.
And so I started to really think about more along the lines of, what do I do that makes me happy now? And so I went through all of this stuff. My wife and I, she's so awesome. She's been so supportive.
At the time.
Yeah, we were married, And so we tried on all these different things. Like, should we move to a new city? And it's like, well, no, because, I mean, you can tell that, like, it'll be the same thing there. So yeah, we were doing basically that, right? Like, how do we do it? And we were in the car one day, and I was just like, you know what always made me super happy? Drawing, making visual artwork. If I could pick anything that I could do for 8 hours a day for the rest of my life or more for the rest of my life, that's it. You know, we're from Columbus, Ohio. So we have Columbus College of Art and Design right there. And so I was like, can we just go look and see if we can make something work there? And we did, and they were awesome about, it all happened really fast at that point. So basically then I went back to school for animation. It was sort of that light bulb thing where it was like, I didn't practice drawing for like 10 years.
Yeah.
Occasional doodles, things like that. For some reason, I thought I was smarter than my instincts or something, and I put it away.
Yeah.
I heard you guys talking with Brett Bean about giving up.
Yeah.
It's like, I didn't even give up. It's like, I didn't even do it. I was just like, oh, no.
Yeah, except there was nothing to give up.
Yeah. So, anyway, that's sort of the story as to how I got back into visual arts, and I think I was answering a question, and I've just talked my way so far.
We were talking about influences with writing, and then I was actually going to go somewhere with that, unless you have something else you want to add.
No. That's I'm sorry that I trailed so far off, but
oh, dude, you're on Chris Oatley's ArtCast. That's what this is all about. That's what we do here.
Yeah.
We tangent. That's part of the deal.
And I don't know if any of that's interesting.
Oh, it's awesome.
But I sure find myself often having a lot to say.
I always have to use when it comes down to it, I just have to use myself as a guide. I just go, is it interesting to me? Then it's going
Yeah.
to the show.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? If it doesn't pass that first test, then it's probably not going to pass anybody
That's the
else's.
big secret, is that people are not that different.
Yeah.
Well, as Brian McDonald would say, we are all the same.
Yeah.
Something I wanted to, and this is actually kind of like a half-baked idea that I wanted to throw out there and just get your thoughts on. But as you were talking about this, the introspection and the observation, what do you think, what is the change that takes place when it moves from copying to observation?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? When it makes that artful turn. What do
Yeah.
you think, what is that? And what do you think it is?
It's repetition.
Huh? What do you mean by that?
The world is full of interesting things, but the world is also full of interesting things that are not posed in an interesting way.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
the world's not set up for composition.
Right.
But you can find amazing things in it. And sometimes it all comes together and you're like, whoa, I'm having this like crazy moment with the universe right now and
Right,
everything's so perfect.
The American Beauty
Yeah.
plastic bag floating around.
Right. But a lot of times you see a lot of great stuff, but it's not artistically set up.
Right.
And I think that sort of where that transition happens is when you get a chance to understand what you want. When you see it, when you first started, like, oh, that's a cool pose, or that guy looks interesting, or whatever, and you try to copy exactly like what they look like.
Right. Get it right.
Yeah, get it right, and it's, I think, one of the beautiful things about animation and illustration and, concept art and any of this stuff is that nobody's asking you to draw exactly what somebody else looks like.
Mm-hmm.
They want your filter.
Right.
So I think it's when you start to kind of develop your filter and you start to understand what you want out of it.
Right.
So now you're not drawing what's there, you're drawing sort of that essence of what's there. And I think that's, people talk about essence a lot in like drawings, and I think that's kind of part of it, at least that's what I've gleaned, is that it's when you understand what's happening. I don't know.
Right. Miles Davis is don't play what's there, play what's not there.
Yeah.
He's like talking about. I mean, I think he's talking specifically about his style. Yeah. Or at least I think his point of reference is his own style, which is a very reductive, minimalist style. Not that everybody listening to this is going to be very, is going to take a reductive approach. This is something we talk about in the Magic Box a lot. My digital painting course, we talk about for the first 6 or 7 months, I'm basically showing them my core techniques, and I'm showing my students those core techniques in the context of me painting in one of my favorite styles in which to paint, which is a stylized. It's very stylized as in their sharp angles and their stylistic choices to the silhouette and the construction of the characters, but the actual, and I hate this word, but the actual rendering, I almost couldn't even say it. I just don't, because it leads people down the wrong path, it's a terrible word, but the actual rendering, the way the character is rendered, and I mean that in the literal dictionary definition of the word, it is very naturalistic. Yeah. And so, for example, the pig has, pig hairs and pebbly skin for his nose and ears and that kind of thing. All this is to say that even in so there's a lot of visual information. Yeah. I love visual complexity and visual information in the paintings. That said, there's still a reductive aspect to the process. It's still designed. There's still a limited color palette. There's still the shapes themselves are caricatured and simplified. I'm not actually going and putting in every single turn of every bone in the skeleton, for example. Although the character is rendered in such a way that it looks like it has a skeleton inside of it, so it's very dimensional and structural. So anyway, why was I saying that? I don't remember why I brought that up.
Talking about I think just getting to style, and when you're observing something.
Oh, choices.
Yeah, choices and stuff like that.
So that's not the only choice for digital painting. And that's not the only choice I always make. It's the one I most often make because I like it the most. But it's not even the choice I always make with digital painting. But the point is that I'm telling them all of this with the understanding that I am not sending you down the path to try and make decisions like I make. Right. That's not the point. Right. I'm showing you how I make those decisions. One, because you want to know, because you ask me all the time, but then also because I want to give you, I want to try and make the stylistic choices the constant right now. Those are the things that we're not going to change because you're learning the techniques. So I freeze the context in this thing that we all can kind of get on the same page around, and I can explain why this style works, but we're not talking about style right now, we're talking about technique. So then later on, as the techniques get ingrained in you and you can start to do those without thinking about them, what that does is it frees you up to be able to paint anything that you want.
Yeah.
So then the style, then you're presented with this level of this evolutionary rite of passage, where it's like, oh, now now any decision that I make, I can kind of make it.
Yeah.
You know, because I'm not, the tools aren't in the way.
Yeah.
The tools aren't slowing me down. Maybe a better analogy would be something that came up at Guitar Center when I worked there, talking about earning your stripes. You know, I worked in the pro audio department at Guitar Center, and I remember the point at which I realized what I was actually doing as a pro audio salesman. And for those of you that don't know, pro audio is like recording equipment, speakers for your like your concert venue or your church or whatever, that kind of thing. Anything kind of the audio, live audio or recorded audio, that kind of realm. So I realized what I was doing is I was trying to lead the customer to the product that would amplify their creative dreams. Amplify, no pun intended. Their creative dreams with as little amount of pain as possible.
Yeah.
And because there's nothing more frustrating than going and buying this new piece of gear, and there's all this promise, there's all this creative promise in that purchase.
Talk about like observational skills and things like that. Like
and you get it home, and then it's like, and everything, wah, 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 wah. You know, it's like so frustrating when you stand there, and the piece won't work, or it's not compatible with your computer, or, you know, there are all these things that can kind of go wrong. So you have to gauge what the customer's kind of, I don't know,
what's between the lines
level.
kind of thing.
Well, yeah, exactly. And what their comfort level is and their goals, and you have to like blend all of those things and find the right piece of gear.
Yeah.
And if you don't find the right piece of gear, then problems happen, and then you get a return, or the customer's just frustrated and they feel bad and they don't come back to you. So that's a very critical thing, to be able to lead them to the right piece of gear. Anyway, the point being, the tool can kill your creative dreams.
Yeah.
At least in the short term of what you're trying to make.
Yeah.
And so, well, yeah, there you go. So that's why technique is important.
Yeah.
You know, getting all the way back to the beginning of this interview, the technique trap, of course, is all about art isn't just about technique.
Right.
But that isn't to say that technique isn't important.
Yeah.
It's just
absolutely
something that we focus on too much. Typically.
Yeah. That's interesting. That makes me think of, I always make that analogy with Pablo Picasso, because I didn't like Picasso's work when all I knew was his cubist stuff. I was just like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm looking at something that's a genius, or am I just looking at somebody who's slapping a bunch of shapes together and calling it art and walking away, right? Like that whole that sort of cliche of like, oh, he doesn't know what he's doing, so he's doing that.
My kid could paint that.
Yeah. Well, no. But I got a chance to look at a sketchbook book with his sketches from when he was like 16, 17 years old, and he is like Da Vinci good. I mean, he was amazing. As soon as I saw those, I understood what it meant to make choices, to be as good as you want to be. So there's not anything that you can't do, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, totally.
So now you're choosing. Yep. And if you go down a cubist route, you chose it, you didn't have to do it. And that to me is the difference between a $7 million painting and something that like your mom doesn't really want to put up in her living room, but she might because she loves you.
Exactly.
You know, because they can almost look the same, but they're not.
Right, yeah, and they don't impact the audience in the same way. And the proof is in the pudding with Picasso, because there are plenty of contemporaries that have just faded away.
Yeah.
You know? That's something I was actually just telling my Magic Box students that this week. I was saying, this is the reason that photorealism isn't a 100% waste of time. Yeah. Because although I'm not even remotely interested in going to see a photoreal CG animated movie. Yeah. I could care less about that. But the exercise of sitting down and trying to make a photoreal drawing with a pencil or a photoreal rendering in Photoshop, although it's probably not going to result in the most interesting piece of art you've ever seen, it's still a worthy time investment as a discipline. Because once you can do that, then you can pull the slider of, super abstract to completely photoreal. It expands your range of ability. Right. And it frees you up to be able. Now, again, getting back to the tools thing, you're not limited by the tool, you're not limited by the technique. You can pull off whatever you want to pull off, and so therefore yes, it gives you more choices as an artist, but it also makes you incredibly versatile and incredibly hireable because you can do anything, at that point.
Yeah.
I feel like this is evident in the manga craze. There's a lot of that's where the art ends, is once I can kind of successfully trace the manga character, and not trace, but once I can draw it exactly like the image from the book or whatever, then I'm satisfied.
Yeah.
And there's it's almost like the conversation isn't even going on in that artist's mind. It's almost as if they're not even thinking about the power of the ability to make an image.
Yeah.
Because it's like, and that's fine. I mean, that's where a lot of us start. I traced Ninja Turtles. So it's like,
I remember drawing Wolverine like over and over and over and over again when I was a kid, like just for fun, because it was like he looked cool.
Yeah, and
like,
you love
I want to make
Wolverine.
that too.
Right.
Like,
You're engaging in the process. It's just that it's sort of the most juvenile aspect of it, and so I think maybe the takeaway here is for those artists that are listening, where you're on the end. Before I say what I'm going to say, let me say I still paint Ninja Turtles from time to time. I mean, I have to get it out of my system,
Nice.
So I'm not saying that like fan art is kid stuff. I'm not at all saying that. Fan art is awesome, but when it comes to, I feel like there are probably a lot of people listening to this show who are on the cusp, and you need to make that decision to go, I've got to find out what's next, instead of focusing so much on repeating everything that's already been done and saying everything that other people have already said and just trying to copy that. What is my contribution to this world? Because the ability to make any kind of image with a pencil is a remarkable ability. Or whatever, Photoshop, I don't care, whatever you're working in.
Sure.
The ability to craft an image that tells any kind of story is amazing, and maybe it's time to consider it from the Spider-Man angle, and with great power comes great responsibility.
That's interesting. I think it's kind of talking a little bit about finding your own style. Not necessarily like directly whatever, but I think that a lot of things you're talking about go into that, because that's like your artwork is sort of a mirror of the things that you like.
Right.
And that starts to shift into your artwork is now using those things to make stuff that is yours. Mm-hmm. And that's an interesting place to be, and I feel like I imagine I will always be there, but I feel like I sort of found that place in my artwork this last semester, which is a big reason why I finally had a portfolio that somebody took some interest in,
right?
Because I started to just notice in my own like characters and things that people were starting to be like, oh, that's one of yours. Like people outside of me would be like, oh, I recognize that. That's like kind of one of your guys. Even though it was just a sketch or something, they'd be like, oh, that's one of Chris's or whatever. And so you started to kind of like, I started to kind of look at that and think, there's some things that I'm doing a lot. Right. There are things that like I know when I like a drawing because the line of action, Andy Frizz, the line of action is there, or and the shapes are there. And I started to think about my shapes versus shapes that I was just copying. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that I got all that figured out or by any means, but I started to see that. And I think that that's kind of one of those things that is really a big transition, I would guess, for a lot of people, especially the artists that are 20, 21, 22, leaving college, because in college you're like filling your tool belt, and then you go out of school, and suddenly it's hard to be like, now you got your tool belt. That's a spiffy new tool belt you got there. What are you going to build?
What are you going to
here? Yeah,
exactly.
That's such a hard thing, I think, to tackle, and that's where my sort of circuitous routes come back to art school after like 10 extra years of doing stuff. Really helps, because I spent a lot of time, like my brain just spent a lot of time fermenting on things. So that allowed me to analyze where my influences were and what I liked about them. And then you can start taking, it's not just like, man, I like Disney. But for me, it was, man, I like Robin Hood, I like 101 Dalmatians. And then it was like, wow, I really like that artwork. Wow, I like kind of how they have artwork, but yet they sort of, sometimes they leave those lines. Like the color goes outside the lines and things. And like their palettes and things like that. And I started to be like, I'm starting to understand something here.
Yeah.
And then I added in, I have all kinds of new stuff too. You know what I mean? Like there are artists that I see all the time that I'm like, whoa, that is sweet. Yeah. I gotta get, you know. And it's not like you say I'm gonna copy that, but you're just, you know, you're so attracted to some like an art piece, and you're like, what's in there?
Yeah. You start to see the space between what came out of their hand in the actual visual, in the pic. You start to see the space between the picture and whatever the real life influence was.
Sure.
So, you know, Pascal Campion's work, you start to see the choices. You know?
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
And why those choices, for example, he's actually a perfect example because his visual choices make everybody feel a certain way.
Yeah.
Which is incredible. That's the visual storyteller's holy grail, really.
Yeah.
You know, and anyway, that's why he's you know, a legend.
Yeah. No, I think, but that would be one of those things that I would say, as somebody who is not. Like, I'm embarking on my career, and I'm super thankful that that my art does have appeal, at least to somebody out there, you know, that was like, hey, we should actually talk to this guy.
Yeah.
But I would say that that's one of those things that would be a really hard. That's going to be a journey for a lot of people, and it's been a journey for me. I just did a lot of it while I wasn't drawing. Yep. Because I wrote a lot of bad stories, and I wrote a lot of bad poetry, you know, and I threw away a lot of artwork. It wasn't visual artwork, but it was like, I kind of learned how to...
You still learn that stuff.
Yeah, you learn how to like parse your influences. Yeah. It's just a different medium.
Yeah, I have a friend of mine who's very much my peer, and this person was working on the cover for one of their recent comics, and they were kind of coming down to the wire, and they sent it to me for some feedback, and it was hard to say because I care so much about this friend, but I was like, really? I could sit here and I could critique it, but you can do better. Yeah. And it's a cover. It's a cover, you know? And so I was like, and the publisher was asking for it was a tight time thing, and I was like, on it, and I was like, I understand, but really ask them for more time. I mean, I really pressed this person about it, and only because they're a really good friend and we have a lot of trust built up. It initially seemed like that wasn't going to happen, and it wasn't a possibility, and it was like, we're just going to have to fix this version of it. And then I just heard back from them this morning, and they completely redid it, and I saw the new one, and it had to be done in a more efficient style to get it done quicker, but it's 100 times better. And it's just that. And I thought about that, and I was like, I got to figure out a way to work this into the podcast at some point. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but here's a perfect opportunity. Yeah. That is a lesson in and of itself, to be willing to be that brave to just go, you know what? Renovate or detonate. Yeah. And I just had to be able to just pull the trigger and blow the thing up and start completely over. That's what... It's amazing. That's like the secret to excellence in a lot of ways. It's just being willing to just get rid of the stuff that's not strong, you know. Yeah. Or if you know you can do better, it's being willing to press through that and not just put the half-baked one in the portfolio. Delete it, throw it in the trash, and start over.
Yeah, that can be. It can be a daunting thing to put 20, 30 hours in a garbage can.
So anyway, it's valuable for you to have learned that, even though you were learning it with words. It doesn't matter. It's like that's a lesson in and of itself. Yeah. And it's something that you have to learn. It's just that most art students are learning that and the craft at the same time. So they're learning all the psychological stuff and the art. So it seems like you're moving more slowly, but really it's like no, you're still on the same track.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I don't know, and I hope that when I talk about it, I'm not trying to make it like I'm doing something separate from what they're doing. I just have this like sort of bass-ackwards way of that I got it done. Yeah. But like I'm in the exact same boat. Yeah. You know, like I said, it's interesting. I'm have a career. I hope a nice long career ahead of me, and I have this big opportunity that's super exciting. And but it's also like it kind of took me 10 years and art school to do it. You know, so it's like I'm actually the exact opposite of doing it quickly. I've done it really, really slowly.
Yeah, I mean, I say this all the time, but it seems like I can never remind everyone enough. It took me 6.5 years to get my Disney gig.
Yeah.
6.5 years.
Yeah.
You know, so when I have students write me and they're like, "Hey, I just graduated 2 weeks ago,
Yeah.
and I don't have a job yet." You know, I've sent portfolios to DreamWorks, to Nickelodeon, to Disney, and I haven't heard back from anybody. What's wrong with me?
Yeah.
I'm like, whoa,
Yeah.
hang on.
Yeah, nothing.
Wait.
Yeah.
First of all, it's a biz dev portfolio, so any production they start up, they're probably going to hire 5 people.
Yeah.
5 out of the, you know, it's like, and that's not meant to intimidate you.
Yeah.
It's just meant to just
Yeah.
paint a realistic picture of the
Yeah.
situation. Don't freak out.
Yeah.
You just have to try for a long time. It's just, that's part of the, yes, occasionally you hear, and that legend travels fast, the guy that broke right in or whatever, you know, and everybody talks about him when 90% of the people that are working in the industry had to fight really hard
Right.
for it, you know?
Yeah. There's a lot of, like, I feel like when I draw, I find a line.
Yeah.
And I feel like there are, I'm guilty of this same thing. Like, you fall in love with the artwork of the guy who knows the line before he starts. And there's like 12 of those people in the world.
Exactly.
And the rest of us have to find the line, you know?
I was at Pixar a couple weeks ago having lunch with John Navarez, and we were walking around, and they had all the art from Monsters University up on all the walls. And it just gets better and better. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's just ridiculous how much of some of the most beautiful concept art you've ever seen in your life. And it's just for one movie, you know? And it's just all around.
One scene.
Unbelievable. And we were talking about that exact thing, and we were looking at Ricky Nerva's drawings, and he had a few of these just super simple Sharpie sketches for some of the characters. They had young Mike and young Sully, and they looked like story sketches. They were so simple, and yet they were some of the most beautiful drawings you could ever see. And we were talking about that, about how, and I was like, I asked Sean, I was like, so what do you think that is? Like, what do you think is, what's not there, you know, that you don't see at first? And he was like, yeah, the years and years and years of practice and of understanding exactly what's happening underneath those very few lines that are drawing the characters. It's Ricky's ability to, you know, the ability to do the shorthand drawing that's, you know, the pinnacle of mastery, his ability to do that understated thing. And that's the thing that's so appealing about it, is that it's so simple, but it's not simplistic, right? It's extremely sophisticated. It's as sophisticated to where, like, look, I mean, I almost can't even have a conversation about it because it's so mysterious. Yeah. But it's something to aim for.
Yeah.
And just as a quick side note, I thought I'd also share something that's sort of related to the conversation, and that is that as I was walking around looking at the paintings and feeling just, you know, starting to have confidence issues and that kind of thing, like, oh man, these are just so good, and starting to feel kind of depressed. And I asked John, I was like, so, you know, how old are these artists that we're looking at? Because there were a bunch of names I didn't recognize. And he's like, oh, everybody here is in their mid-30s. And I remember thinking, like, oh, whew, okay, all right, I feel better about that, you know? And that's something I think is lost on a lot of students that are at a typical student age that are trying to break in. It's like, again, guys, we're talking about a very small art department in an industry that is already very small. There's no reason to not try. It's just, you just gotta understand that it takes time, and you have to commit. If you're not ready to be in this, if you're not ready to work hard until your mid-30s, then what are you wasting your time with? You know, it's like, what's the point anyway? So it's like, you have to just commit for the long haul, regardless of when you get that gig that you're after.
It's, I mean, that gets a lot into something I've learned about going into, like, an art field, is that, you know, not everybody is lucky enough to feel a calling. I've had a bunch of conversations with friends and stuff. I do talk to inanimate objects, but with friends and other people, and they're like, "Wow, you know, it's so lucky that you know what you want to do." But you realize that, first of all, you're lucky right there. If you have something that you're so passionate about, I've heard you mention it before that, which I think in the last podcast, that if you love it so much that you do it even though like you're really bad at it or it's bad or whatever, and that's the whole thing of, would you do it? Like, is it the kind of thing you would do with nobody around? Is it the kind of thing you would do when it wasn't for a thing?
Right.
You just did it. And so if you have that, kudos, right? You're off. Like, you're off and running. And then, you know, like you said, the rest of it is like, I mean, there are people that are just so talented, it's insane. And yes, I am jealous of them. Right. And, you know, but the rest of us, like, you know, you do have to work towards it. But that kernel of like, anyway, and not everybody has that. Not everybody has that initial kernel. And like you were saying about, if you're not willing to work until your mid-30s, that kind of gets into that whole thing of like what you're essentially saying is you have to have that initial love of it.
Right.
And there are going to be times when you just can't freaking take it.
Yeah.
But you can't not do it.
Right. Yeah.
And then like you're good. And I feel like eventually, as long as you're like a nice person to be around,
right,
I think you'll probably you know, get some sort of shot somewhere along the line.
Yeah, it's gonna make you're gonna have progress. You know? It's like that was something that my advisor when I was in graduate school, Maria Palazzi, she said to me that really impacted me. It was one of those like just perfect timing, the exact thing I needed to hear at that exact time. And she said, I don't remember what I was struggling with at the time, but I was talking to her about it, and she said, you know, Chris, the great news about this industry is that hard work and persistence really does pay off. And that was it. That's all I needed to hear at the time. You know, it's like, yes, it just reignited the fire. And that has, you know, I'm living proof of that. You know, as are you and everybody else that's, you know, been on the show. It's awesome.
Well, I feel like everybody else who's been on the show is much better living proof of that than I am.
Well, let's talk about this actually. Okay, so you went to CCAD. Before we reveal what is, you know, the news, paint a picture for us about what was going on in your most recent year at school and where you're at just in your headspace and with your portfolio and that kind of thing. Right. What were you doing? You had a lot of biz dev work. Just what did your life look like before this sort of transition began?
There was growing clarity for what I was pursuing.
Why?
Actually, I guess I do know why. So I was an animation major in general, and I was trying storyboarding, animating itself, some viz dev, some background painting, a little bit of character design, all these things. And I, over time, realized that I was always, like, saving character design as, like, that last thing, because that was my dessert. That was the thing that was, like, that's fun and easy. Like, I love that.
Wow.
And after like so many projects of sort of realizing that like that's mine, you know, and not saving it like I don't get to it. I mean saving it like when I'm tired and I've done like 6 hours of homework and I just don't feel like, you know, continuing to sit at this desk and do this stuff. That's the thing that if I keep that there, I will do that. You know what I mean?
Like an incentive?
Yeah,
like
it was my incentive.
Okay,
it's like I get through like everything, and I love doing all kinds. Getting through artwork is a relative term,
right?
But you get through these other things to get to like that was my dessert. You know, that was you did it. So now you get to draw these characters or whatever. So when I realized that started to clarify what I was doing, and so then I started to. Another benefit of being a little bit older, going back to school, is you can approach school. I think the best approach to school is not to approach it as school, but as like 1,000 opportunities packed into 3 or 4 years to get better at whatever you want to do.
Wow.
And so I always sort of had the luck when I came back to school to look at it that way. But when I started to realize after trying out all these different things that character design type thing was what I loved to do,
right?
Then I just started treating every class, and I communicated with my instructors, and I didn't like just, not do work, but I would ask, and I would be like, all right, cool, like I would do this, or I would do that, and I would start to tailor everything I did towards getting better at that. Yeah. And if you do it like with your instructors as opposed to just like doing it in the middle of a class where you're not supposed to kind of be doing that, it's amazing, like, because they want you to succeed.
Exactly.
So like you'll end up having a good conversation, and they'll know your goals.
Right.
So it's good to like do that kind of stuff. But that was kind of where I was at that point was realizing not just that artwork is cool, but what within the field do I really want to do? And then you kind of have to ask that question of like, wow, you go online and there's these portfolios and these blogs that have amazing artwork, and you're like, okay, well, I'm not good like they're good.
Yeah.
But do I have it in me? Do I think that I'm not going to make what they make, because they're already making it, and they're like 5 years better than me at it now. So 5 years from now, they'll be 5 years better at that thing than I am now. So do I have that sort of coincided with that same thing where I was starting to see a style come around in my work? So I got kind of lucky that those two things, I think, coalesced. So I was like, okay, I'm starting to understand that I don't have to be exactly, A, B, C, or D person out there.
Right.
Maybe I can bring something that somebody will find interesting.
Yep.
I hope.
Yeah.
And then I just sort of started doing that, and the reaction I started getting from my peers and from instructors and things were like that, those improvements were happening.
So there's external and internal validation happening.
So that was kind of one of those things, and then that picked up steam. And then honestly, like a lot of it too is just like I was like working on it like 60 plus hours a week. So I was always like putting together my portfolio, and then I would like do a new drawing that was better and drop an old one out and put a new one in, and like it was changing all the time, and I was like fretting. I would spend so many hours on like the presentation of the portfolio, but not to make it more complex. It was like I kept dropping things out, right? Like the artwork's got to be so good that like everybody's like, oh, what was this, like his logo? That's something you talked to me about when you came to CCAD, and you brought up those kinds of things of like, look, man, logo is like not what they're...
Nobody cares. Yeah. It's like, don't waste your time.
Yeah.
And if you have a great logo, awesome, but you don't have to... There's all this meme of put your entire name, address, phone number, everything on every single page of the portfolio, and I'm like, why?
Yeah.
We all have websites now, and everyone's got a smartphone, or at least everyone in the animation industry that's in recruitment, or they've all got smartphones. So put a little watermark in the margin of your website, and just make sure your contact information is easy to find. It's that simple. Then they can pull out their iPhone, go to your website, and then click a button to call you. It's like, this is a different world now.
That's something that actually got added from talking to you. I think that's kind of where it was.
That's great. I mean, that makes sense. There is a lot of clarity in that.
Yeah.
And it really says something too for having wise voices in your life.
Yeah.
People to talk to you. This is why we just pound this so often, and I feel like most artists I encounter who are struggling have really missed this, and it's like the circle of trust.
Yeah.
And at CCAD, you have an incredible faculty, and so even if just them weighing in on your work, you are going to do so well.
Yeah.
But you the brick and mortar art school doesn't have the corner on the market on having a valuable circle of trust.
Sure.
You can set that up everywhere. It requires patience and focus and a certain amount of restraint to not just invite everybody who's remotely interested into it and then sort of like poison the water hole, but you can, and you should, and you have to. It's like you've got to have the external voices and people people whom you trust and who trust you, and actually have things that are valuable to say. They don't have to be 20 years ahead of you, but they have to have valuable stuff to contribute.
And I should say too, like just to make sure it's in there is your peers too. I mean, they're
well, that's what I mean, actually.
I mean, not just, I guess I might be sort of close in age to some of my teachers and things, but also the students and stuff too. You know what I mean? Like they're a part of that as well.
Yeah.
So I don't want to make it sound like you always have to go like up in skill level and experience. Like you can have discerning tastes wherever. And I know that like at CCAD, in the animation department, it's like a really good atmosphere. And that was a big part of it too, is because there's, there were a lot of like really cool artists and cool people.
Yeah. So
like they're all, we're all showing each other stuff all the time. So I think that like, that was a part of it too.
People are hungry.
And that's a fun part of it too, right? Because you can't help it sort of, you see somebody's like drawing, and you're like, man, that's really cool, and you're like really supportive. And then you turn around and you're like, I gotta go draw. I gotta go get better. That guy is awesome now. But But yeah. So that mindset thing was kind of like, oh, something else I was going to say too, and I think you've hit on it, and I guess since I'm talking in this format, like I'll just make the observation or whatever that you were talking about sort of too many cooks in the kitchen versus not letting anybody in the kitchen kind of a thing, and I think that is a really, everybody's mark for that changes, but finding your mark for that is going to be a big part of, I think, your individuality and like knowing yourself and all that stuff alongside of your style evolution. And then knowing, of course, like you said, who is it, but that can always change, and you got to be open to new voices, but you got to like listen to yourself, and if like somebody is souring your work, like recognize that, even if they're like awesome or something, and you want them to like your work. But at the same, does that make sense?
It's the trust thing. That's why we use the word trust. It's so important. It's like, are they, trust is built through mutual vulnerability, right? And it's like, are they self-disclosing? Are they vulnerable? Are they listening? Are they doing all the things that build trust? And are you doing the same thing? It's like, if that isn't happening, then it's going to be a weaker version of the ideal. And we're obviously, none of us are perfect, but we're still aiming for the good, a really great experience. Otherwise, it's a waste of your time. And, you're just setting yourself up for a lot of pain, I think. And so that's why I'm like, take your time building the circle of trust. But I feel like I understand there's a ton of barriers, and it's hard to get to know people. I mean, I understand. Nobody said it's easy, but I feel like a lot of artists who are struggling, and it's true for a lot of different kinds of artists, but in particular artists who are younger and struggling, and by younger I mean in their early 20s, mid-20s, and struggling through this whole thing. It's kind of like they're not trying. They're not trying to find that group of 3 or 4 that are really going to help to elevate.
I would actually, I agree with you, but I would throw a different word in there. I think it takes time to know how to do that. If that makes sense. And when you're
you have to have some broken hearts.
You're going to have like a few people where you're like, I thought that was it. Or not like that was it, but like you really trust them, and after a few years you start to be like, wow, this is not a positive relationship for me, or something like that.
Will I ever find the one? Except it's actually harder because now you're trying to find the 4.
or
whatever. Let's start with 1. That's still good.
But I think it takes time, and that's one of those things that like life teaches you as much as anything. It's just kind of doing that, like just like any relationship in life. You kind of gotta, you go up and down, and you have ins and outs, and good and bad, and
that's really actually what I was getting at first, is saying that, but you still have to move forward. Like, if you don't try, so it's like, yes, it's very important, and I don't want you to end up in a situation where you're wasting a ton of time, or where you're just going to get your heart crushed, or whatever. It's like, I don't want you to be in that situation, but you have to risk that in order to build trust. Right? I mean, it's like, you can't steer a parked car. I mean, it says all the time. It's like you have to move forward. It's just try and move forward carefully and patiently, while keeping this advice in mind. That's about the best version, I think, that you can. That, and then don't hang out in places where people are idiots. That's the other thing. It's a lot of my subscribers will go, and they'll just go to some forum where there's 100,000 strangers hanging around, and it's like, well, that's a needle in a haystack situation. Go to the places where there's interesting, compelling, challenging conversation, where people are a little more grown up, and don't try and get the guy who's going and just ripping someone a new one. Don't just get away. Don't hang out where he hangs out.
If you see somebody like just unabashedly, like without any sort of construction, just ripping into something, then it's like they should go on your like, I'm probably not.
Do not call list.
That's kind of one of those things where there are indicators that tell a lot about a whole personality. You shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but sometimes the cover is really telling. And sometimes there are things that can be on a cover that you're like, you're probably not a guy for me.
Covers can serve as a warning.
They can. They absolutely can. So
an opportunity presented itself. During the midst of this kind of increasing clarity, your portfolio is getting stronger. You're being ruthless about cutting stuff and replacing work, and just trying to go full steam ahead.
Yeah.
And then something happens.
Yeah. Well, of course, during the building of the artwork, I'm also doing like a lot of like the networking things, like bugging like you and other, you know, CCD grads and things like that. But I'm also putting in applications, which is so not fun.
Oh man.
But you know, so I put out a handful of applications, and one of them was to Riot Games.
Mm-hmm.
And so essentially I was in class in like middle of April. I put this in like February, and I got an email. And I put in applications, you know, to your Disneys and your Pixars and things like that. But Riot Games emailed me back, and I was in animation. So what actually had drawn me to them was their art style. So I was like, I feel like I can I feel like my style could plug in with their style.
You can relate.
And that's why I went that direction.
Yeah.
Not because of the game, even though it's cool, and like, you know, not because of anything else, or like not because it was in Los Angeles or nothing like that. It was just like, I feel like I could
it makes sense.
Work there,
yep.
You know, like I could be part of that. So anyway, I sent it in though, and I didn't actually know anybody at Riot, but they liked what they saw in my portfolio, and so I got a call, and then I flew out there, did an interview, and then right around the end of the school semester, I found out that I got an internship there.
Man.
So yeah.
Now, did you apply for an internship?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
I did. So yeah, and it's kind of, it seems kind of like, it's an interesting thing that I was very animation focused.
Right.
And it was a video game studio that was like, hey, you might fit with us.
That makes good choices.
Yeah.
They make good choices.
So that was interesting, but that's one of those things too, is like, I didn't hesitate. I went all after it, because just because they weren't Disney or Pixar or whatever, it doesn't mean that they're not an awesome studio and they're not super like, they're not this great opportunity.
Yeah. Well, and if my students are any gauge, which I know they are, it's a very sought after work environment.
Yeah, no,
it's very sought after employees.
It's incredible. Actually, really, I went out there for the summer and I really enjoyed it, and I'm really impressed with it. It's.
What can you tell us about what you actually did there and what the internship was? I mean, I'm sure there's certain things that are non-disclosure and whatever.
Yeah. Well, the internship was a 12-week internship situation, and I went out there to do. They call their characters champions. So basically, champion and skin, which is like when a character gets sort of refitted with like a different outfit or a different look or whatever. And I'm a concept artist for that area.
Okay.
So
got it.
And I went out there and basically like worked on, you know, projects in that area for them. Mm-hmm. But it was great. They pulled me out there and they sort of let me go as fast as I wanted to. They were very open about.
As in your work? Like actually painting?
Yeah, the stuff that I was doing. It wasn't like, here's sort of like a dummy project to work on. It was like
production.
What's your interest? Yeah. What do you want to work on? And it's kind of like a very cool vibe of, if it's cool, we'll, you know, work with it, you know?
That's
and
awesome.
So yeah, I basically, from a standpoint of, I was focusing on animation, which I think I'm sort of trying to like say about 16 different things at once, I think, here.
Welcome to my world.
Yeah. It was an interesting thing, right? Because like I said, I was focused on animation, and so the way I drew and the way I still draw was very large shape oriented, very readable oriented.
Yeah.
Silhouettes were super important, and attitude, storytelling within poses, things like that were all like focuses of mine.
Yeah, good character design.
Yeah. And that, interestingly enough, is what they ended up liking about my portfolio, is that they have other guys there, believe me, who can like render, and I mean, they have a bunch of really great artists there. Yeah. But they just liked something about what I could add to it.
Yeah.
Just kind of like, you know, another spice sort of in the pot. Like they just were like, oh, well, we think, you know, your shapes and your storytelling might help make things, you know, interesting, whatever.
Well, and with that particular division, I'm sure that they're also looking to the future too. It's like, how do we keep this interesting, and how do we keep innovating it while continuing to give our customers what they want, also keeping it new and exciting. So I would imagine there's probably some, you have to think deeper into the storytelling.
Yeah, no, it's definitely it's a game that has a lot of characters, and there's a lot of cool stuff that's been done. So you do have to work really hard to find cool like new stories to tell and things like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's one of those luck things where I just happened to have a portfolio that hit on a thing that they were interested in. I didn't tailor my portfolio to them. I sort of followed my own arc.
Yeah.
And I know that that's a big thing that I think a lot of people leaving art school do that. Like, do I want it to look like such and such studio, or do I want it to be my own? And whatever, and I think
very tricky territory.
Yeah,
it's very tricky.
In my standpoint, I was fortunate. I was lucky in that the eyes that saw my portfolio said, "That's not what we have now," and I'm still like going to have to adjust to their product.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But they were interested in adding that.
Yeah.
So it was kind of one of those things where that was a timing thing and a luck thing. They just, happened to hit it.
There's a post that Seth Godin wrote, and I think it went up today, and I think the title is just El Greco. I'll link to it in the show notes for this podcast episode. But he said El Greco inspired the Impressionists, basically, and he was way ahead of his time, 200 years ahead of his time, and so therefore he was rejected completely. And so Seth talks about, because Seth is very much about being innovative and being ahead of the curve and leading and that kind of thing, obviously. But he is also about surviving and paying the bills and being practical about it as well, even though he leans more into the idealistic end of the spectrum, which is why I like him so much. But anyway, his point was, if you want to make a living at this, you have to be you have to be leading the state of the art. Like, you have to be the one at the bleeding edge of the state of the art.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get too far ahead, then you don't make any sense to anybody. And if you get so far behind that you can actually trick yourself into thinking that you're ahead.
Yeah.
Because you're so far behind, you're not doing what anybody else is doing, and so it's like, oh, we've got the corner on the market, and then you just disappear and you're irrelevant. And so there's this that sweet spot is what you shoot for. So anyway, what you're saying to me sounds like exactly that, like that exact dynamic happening in the real world.
Yeah.
You were, or at least Riot's perception of your work was that, he would fit in, but he fits at this place that will help us get to where we want to go.
Sure, right.
Stylistically and creatively and on and on. Which, now that I'm even saying that out loud, that's pretty much the reason anyone gets hired anywhere. That nobody really gets hired because you're boring and irrelevant, or because you can draw an exact replica of a manga page, or because you can render I don't know. I could start really insulting a lot of people, so I'll just
No.
But I think you're just doing stuff that's, well, okay. Here's something that I think is really pragmatic. I get a lot of people send me video game concept art portfolios. A lot of people email those to me and ask me for advice on them. And on occasion, I have time to go look at one, and on an even rarer occasion, I have time to write somebody back and give them some feedback. All this is to say that so often I see it and I'm like, well, this is exactly what they already have.
Right.
I mean, exactly. It just looks like a slightly less experienced version of what.
And that's a hard place to. That's a hard door to open.
And the question, and I don't mean to be unnecessarily harsh, but I do mean to be blunt in saying, why would they hire you?
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in a way that's like there's some sort of subtext saying you're no good. I mean, just literally face that question.
Yeah.
Why would they hire you? Just really why?
Yeah.
Why would they?
And actually, I want to interject right there.
Yeah.
Because that gets into a very real thing that happened to me the first few weeks of the internship. Is I got in there and they told me, we like your shapes, your storytelling, those things I was talking about. And they wanted me to work and try to plug that into what they do.
Right.
But even I still had to. I went around and everybody's so good. All the artists around you are so good, and it's very inspiring and it's awesome to learn from them. It took me a few like a week or two.
Yeah.
To kind of get my bearings.
Right.
Because you immediately see it and you're like, oh, I got to render so much tighter. I got to do all this stuff that's like these other guys here because they're doing that. And it really did take me a few minutes to sort of step back and say, wait a minute. I was brought here for a thing.
Right.
Maybe I should do what I do.
Right.
and work to incorporate some of these things, learn from these guys.
Because you will pick it up.
Yeah, but I need to be back on what I do. And then it was like a lot easier to sort of hit a stride. And then it was like you start to just slowly become just like one of the guys working there.
That's
you know,
awesome.
and because you're not trying to be the guy next to you, you're not trying to be the guy two rows down. He is that guy.
Right.
And when they want something that looks like that, they'll go, "Hey, guy, can you like give us one of those or whatever?" So now you start to realize like, okay, cool. I love that. That's super awesome. You're, a rendering monster, and I want some of that.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to try to do that.
Right.
Because, but that is also through like communication with the guys that are like mentoring you through this process, and then listening to that when they say, no, don't worry about that.
Yeah.
Do your thing. So anyway, but that was an interesting thing like you're talking about, and I think it gets right back to it is even when I sort of got my foot in the door, it took me like a little bit of time to be like, whoa, okay, I'm not that guy. I got to be me.
Yeah.
Now I still got to work with them on what they do, or work with the studio and do what they want.
Right.
But try it my way.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, there's this dynamic, and it's something I warn my students about all the time, and that is, be ready to get worse before you get better. Because the minute you start thinking about a lot of what you're doing, and you don't even realize this, a lot of what you're doing based on intuition, and that can be good in the sense that it's the fun, your whatever level of mastery you have, any one artist has with the fundamentals, that's the part that's good, where you can kind of, like we were talking about earlier, you can execute. But there's a bad part of it too, in that your bad habits and the areas where you're lazy are easy to overlook. In fact, you might be completely blind to them.
Yeah.
The minute you start thinking about the process again, the minute you start growing and actually improving, then everything is crystal clear, and all the mistakes become apparent to you. Well, not all of them, but a lot of mistakes become apparent to you. A lot of the bad stuff becomes apparent to you, and you feel less happy with your work because you're growing.
Yeah.
And you become conscious of it, and then that also makes you. And then oftentimes it also just does it. You're just making the work is just not as strong because you're trying to think about one part of it to try and improve that part, and the stuff that you would have taken for granted gets forgotten, and it's not as strong because you're focused on this one part.
Yeah.
So all this is to say that don't freak out when that happens. Don't freak out. Realize that if you're in a growth period, you might experience the exact opposite of what you're trying to do.
Right.
You're trying to grow, and yet it'll feel like you're going in the other direction.
Yeah.
And that's actually a really good, what's often a very good scenario because you actually are growing.
Yeah, it is a little scary. It is a little bit scary, especially when you're surrounded by, a lot of like admirable art skills, and you're like, oh, I just drew something that is terrible. And then that's exactly when they pop up next to you at your desk. They're like, what are you working on?
Yeah.
And you're just oh,
exactly.
No,
this is the worst. Yeah, it was amazing. That was the one great thing about being at Disney, is that feeling like being surprised by that over and over about how non-judgmental everyone is.
Yeah.
Because everyone knows you have crappy drawing days, and it was just so cool. So I immediately started to feel very, very safe in that regard.
Yeah.
Just like, oh wow, I don't have to worry about that. I can. They're serious when they talk about how this is a place where you're free to fail.
Yeah.
There's a difference in consistently under-delivering and having an off day or doing a crappy drawing, and it's like there's a wide gap between those two extremes.
Sure. Yeah, and like you said, I mean, sometimes a lot of bad drawings come from pushing into a new area for yourself, and so I guess like when everybody in the room has been there, then they understand it more. Right. When they see it,
it's just not offensive to them.
Yeah.
They're not threatened by it, and it doesn't make them worry that you're not going to be able to do the stuff.
Even if you're a little worried for a second.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You're like, wait a minute.
Well, that's why the hours logged and all that. That's when all the intensity you were putting in your portfolio starts paying off.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I practiced this alone in the apartment when I had no hope.
Yeah.
Right. I'm exaggerating. But I mean, when things seemed completely uncertain, I stuck with it, and I kept practicing, because now is the time that stuff comes back.
Yeah.
All the thousands of paint the fence, up, down.
Right.
All of a sudden that all comes rushing back when I thought it was pointless. The wax on, wax off, and whatnot.
I found it also to be a decent time to go back, and if you have a good understanding of like what you've pulled from your influences, it's actually not a bad time to like revisit some of those influences, because it's like kind of getting a reflection of your like sort of your journey, and that can sort of resettle you too.
I did that recently, actually.
So I found that was like really helpful to go back and look at some of like just art pieces that have inspired me in the past, things that I've learned from, and it's like, oh wait, that's who I am, you know, and you can kind of check in with yourself in a way, and that can sort of help too, like, not that you're like freaking out, but you kind of just get that like, why isn't this feeling like my stuff or my good stuff, you know? So you were mentioning kind of that process, and it was like, I definitely ran into that, especially when you're sitting next to the guys that are like, so good.
Well, and on this note of recalibrating with your influences, I have, I think, a clearer picture in my mind of where I want to go stylistically with my next few paintings than I've ever had in the history of my life as an artist. And it's all because of that exact thing, because I checked back in with Humberto Ramos and John Singer Sargent and these other artists that I want to emulate, and that I'm sort of been on this very long journey to try and bring in various pieces of what I like about their work. And it's starting to work. My Animal Farm piece that I talk about, I feel like nauseatingly,
I love it.
Not nauseatingly often, but that was I talk about it so much because it was so important, and it was a turning point in that journey, and so I'm just super excited about playtime. You know, it's like that's what you start to get back to that. I was like, oh right, I remember why I was. I remember the point. I remember the point of all this. That's great.
You sort of crest a skill hill. And now you get to play on the on the other side of that hill. And then of course you're gonna start to slow down. And you're gonna
hit the dip again.
Find another hill that you gotta crest, and you can kind of play again. So that's a fun place to be. I feel like I have a lot of those ahead of me, but like,
oh man.
But you know what I mean? As an artist, like, I mean, I feel like I'm miles and miles behind you and all, so many of the people that I enjoy their work. But
that will never change.
That's cool.
Ever goes away. That's great, man. So so that was your internship. Yet the plot thickens. So take us through that next. And this, I haven't talked to you very much about what kind of happened next and how you got where you are right now. So connect the dots for me there.
Basically, so I have an English degree that I had before I went back to school. So when I got this internship, it was like I had gotten my foot in the door to where I wanted to be. So I made no bones about during my internship process that like I wanted them to see me as somebody who could work there.
A good fit, as they say.
So I approached it like kind of like, I guess, a 3-month job interview, you know? And I told them the whole time I was, really open, and they were great about being super open about, like, they were completely cool with me saying I wanted to work there, and my goals being that I wanted to be brought in. I didn't want to go back to school so much as I wanted to, and that's nothing against CCAD. CCAD is great. It's just that I was where I wanted to be. So that's what I did. And basically over the course of, 3 months, I put together a portfolio of things that I did there with my like lead concept artist.
So he was helping you, he was coaching you through the portfolio that you would submit again to Riot?
No, actually, I didn't resubmit a portfolio. It was, he and I had goals for like projects that we wanted me to do or try while I was there.
And in the same kind of realm, departmentally?
Like try my hand at doing a couple of these of the skins, and you do some of those, and so you see like what kind of stuff do you do when you have that project in front of you. Okay, so this is like your thing. What are you gonna, this is the parameters. How do you do? And then so you do a few of those, and then I got a chance to step up and show how I show my process of working on like an actual champion idea, which is a character design. So I got to basically like attack that sort of project, and he was there to help sort of like lead the way through there, along with a number of the artists there. We're all great, and like the feedback, is constant and all of that. But so basically by the end of the summer, it wasn't set up at the beginning to like, well, you'll try to get this portfolio done and then we'll present it. But it was like, as the summer wore on, it was kind of let's keep all this stuff in a file, so when the summer ends, you've made it clear you want to work here.
Yeah.
We'll go and we'll talk to the art director and we'll see what happens. So that's essentially what happened.
Awesome.
And through, I would love to say his name, my lead concept artist.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's okay or not.
Right.
But he's been super duper awesome. You know who you are.
Yeah.
And he was like awesome about being on it and going to bat for me. So, and I don't know if he had to. I hope it wasn't a horrible experience to go to bat for me. But basically through that process and kind of being just open about my goals, and then sort of doing the different things that I would do there if I were to work there full time.
Yeah.
And then they basically had a litmus test to say,
man,
this is his first few months here, and these are the things he produced here.
Yeah.
Are they to a level that we want to be to be a full-time artist here?
Yeah.
And I was, fortunate that at the end they were like, yes, we think that, keeping him on board. And I know you guys mentioned a lot, but personality, it wasn't just like artwork. I think that I had failings in my artwork that I am excited to get better at.
Right.
But being a part of the discussions that make other projects good, being there, discussing things, taking feedback, showing new iterations and iterations and iterations and iterations, being willing to like do all that and just sort of be who you are and plug into it personality-wise, I would say was, for me especially, was like at least 50-50 with the artwork. So basically, all that came together. And now I've been told that they're hiring me on to be an associate concept artist at Riot. So now I'm back in Ohio, basically filling boxes and painting our place and trying to get out of it, essentially, like get out to Los Angeles. Yeah,
that's awesome.
So it's heady. It's a pretty heady experience.
Yeah, right.
Just from the internship in the beginning to get that email back that like, hey, somebody's halfway interested.
Yeah.
And then once you get there, go 100 miles an hour. It was 12-hour days all the time.
Yeah.
And then like it was hard not to go in on Saturday and Sunday to do like a little more.
Yeah.
And a little more. And you learn a ton. I haven't even begun to digest what I learned from the other artists and stuff there.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's basically what happened. I was ready to go on, and I think that you may or may not be, and if school's like what you need to go back to, I would definitely say go back.
Right.
If you have more to like glean from school.
Yeah.
But maintain those relationships as best you can.
Yeah.
But like once I was in, I was like, there's no freaking way. I will do whatever I have to make sure.
Well, and that's the thing. It just was time. Yeah. And I might actually wrap it up with something I've been thinking about a lot. In my backyard at my house in Burbank, we had an orange tree. And do you know how to pick an orange?
I do not.
Okay. So for those of you that want to learn how to pick an orange, here you go. You have to go up to the tree and you have to reach for the orange. Okay, so that's like your application, that's sending your portfolio or what is it. So you reach for a lot of oranges, right?
Right.
But depending on the season, there might be no oranges ready to eat. Okay. But it's the really important part of this analogy is, or a metaphor. Is this an analogy or a metaphor, English major?
See, it's been a long time. I think it's a metaphor.
It is like an orange tree.
It's an analogy. Something is like something is an analogy.
Okay, so it's
something
an analogy.
Is something is a metaphor.
So it's an analogy.
Or that's reversed. But I think it's an analogy.
Okay, we'll go with analogy. So anyway.
Oh, just put me to shame.
Yeah. So you have to reach for the orange. Then, and I'm not going to, no analogies, no metaphors right now. Literally how you have to pick the orange, just in the real world. You have to just tug ever so slightly and twist. And if it's time, the orange will just come right off.
Sure.
There's no wrestling. You won't tear the branch. If you have to pull so hard that the branch, that the little stem that's holding on the orange rips the branch and you see the green of the twig or whatever, that's not good. The orange is not ready to eat.
Yeah.
It's not ripe enough. But it will, and they will just come right off. Just do a slight little twist and a slight tug, and it'll just come right off.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about this a lot and about how this applies to breaking into the animation industry, or the games industry in this case. And that's exactly it. You have to reach out, and you have to tug the orange.
Yeah.
You have to try. You have to make an attempt. But you also have to understand there's certain seasons of your life, and sometimes it's just not January or early February whenever we harvest oranges in Southern California. It's just not time yet.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you don't try. I mean, if you see the orange and it's the right color and it looks like it's ready to go, you have to try, because sometimes they come early, sometimes come late. But also, if you wait too long, they fall into the ground and the squirrels eat them or they rot. And so it's like you have to try. You have to reach and tug the orange. But it's also important to remember that if you get into that struggle, that kind of violently tugging the branch where you're going to break the tree, even if you do get the orange to come off, it's not going to taste good. It's going to be bitter and dry. Yeah. And I feel like a lot of when people send...
this is all like a super analogy.
Yeah. When you get that's the frustration of it all, right? And there's times where you just end up sabotaging your own pursuit because you get frustrated and impatient. And it's like, man, even if you do just manage to, take the gig that isn't really the right gig, and just get because it seemed like an art job or something, it's like it's not going to taste good when you get there. So
that's
the orange tree.
Yeah, that's really good. You should make sure that gets like crystallized somewhere in print.
I will.
No, that's really good, and it does talk a little bit to like the whole Oogway the turtle, about the peach tree and all that. That you can't control everything about it. I guess I feel like I don't know if I'm really a person to talk about that analogy all the way yet, because I'm just starting out, but there is a certain amount, like a peach tree is still a peach tree, not to bring another fruit tree into this. You can plant it where you want, you can do all kinds of things, you can pick the fruit too soon or you can pick it too late or all that stuff, but there's a certain amount that you can't control. And I think actually this goes back to another Chris Oatley-ism from one of your previous podcasts, which is the one thing that you can control is when everything is out of your hands, do what you do. Make your art.
Right.
And then, if you can keep that joy, and if you can keep that, I guess, keep striving for the art itself, then I guess the rest of it, some of it's going to be ill-timed, some of it's going to, fall through, some of it's going to be absolutely out of the park, but you'll always have that thing, that art there to kind of fall back on. I don't know, and I feel like I'm totally probably not the right guy to talk about this, because I'm really fortunate at this moment. And I managed to, I guess, pick the right orange, but there was a lot of luck to it. But there's still that undercurrent, though, I guess, of the ladder that you built and the yard in which it sits and all of that stuff is the hours and hours and hours that you put into artwork or something. I feel like I'm actually just creating this big mashup thing of words.
It's awesome.
But
it's awesome. It's good.
Yeah,
it's really good.
But it's. I think it is hard. It's hard. It's hard to find the right orange at the right time. And it's fortunate when you're good enough that somebody is willing to give you a chance. But man, it does, I think, take a little bit of luck sometimes. And then when there's not luck, there's drawing, man. There's just hitting it, And sometimes hitting it is I'm tired of freaking hitting it. Right. Somebody, and this spring too, even when I was getting all this clarity, I was definitely somebody call me, please. You could ask my wife. It wasn't all. She was there when I was just I just want a call back. I was even I don't even, if I don't get the internship, just talk to me. Just
I remember
give me a
those
shot,
days.
please.
I remember that.
So it's I guess that's where, from sure, a lot of listeners, there's plenty of them, I'm quite sure, that are good enough to be in the industry. It's just, you just gotta.
Well, and it's those people that need to try a lot of oranges. That's the thing. You've got to just get out there and just tug on them all. Just remember, lightly tug, lightly twist, and if it's in this is what will happen if it's time. Now that's not the problem, of course, with this analogy is that it could start to paint a picture that you don't have to hustle. It's man, you had so the delicate twist is maybe it could be misleading. I mean, you've kind of got there you have to give it 110%, but hopefully it's clear from your story that that's exactly what you did.
I think so. I think that I don't know. I guess, my story is one of those things I guess I don't get to decide on what it means to other people.
Yeah, right.
But I think that is the truth of it. It's like, yeah, it is luck, but it's not all luck.
Right.
It is hard work, but it's not all hard work.
Yeah, right.
And art is a magical thing in that if you create your own art,
right,
you're not competing. I mean, you're always competing.
Right.
But with other good artists. But if you create art that's like true to you and like is sort of your own,
yeah,
you're not competing against anybody.
Yeah.
And so then it becomes just right place, right time. Get your work out there.
Yeah.
Get your blog updated, so the right pair of eyes can take a look at it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's what I tell students all the time is, there are tons of things that you can't control, but there are a few things that you can control that have a huge amount of influence in your success.
Yeah.
Tremendous amount. I mean, if you don't have a place, if it's impossible for people to find you, then that could be a severe deal breaker.
Yeah.
It's like if your work isn't strong, this is the thing. Laura and I talk about this on Paper Wings all the time. If, there's all this, we get these questions all the time. How do I get people to read my webcomic? And it's like, well, make it good. And maybe that seems pessimistic. I hope it doesn't. It's just that simple. It's like if you tell a great story, and maybe it has to look good, maybe it doesn't. I mean, look at South Park. I mean, whatever.
Sure. Right.
It can look crappy, but make it good. Whatever that means for your specific kind of pursuit. If you're trying to do the South Park thing, then obviously the visuals aren't as important.
Right.
Or they are actually, the visuals are extremely important in South Park.
Yeah.
They're not important in the making it a Disney animation kind of style drawing.
Right.
But anyway,
they don't serve the same purposes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Make it the best version of what it is.
Sure.
It's like focus on that first.
Yeah.
And then the rest will happen. Yes, there are tactics and there are things you can do to try and improve. You can try and bump the numbers up a little bit, but you have to work with numbers that are already there.
Yeah.
It's like you can't, if there's nobody that's interested in the first place, then it's going to be really difficult.
Well, and that gets back to that whole idea of like, if you open up Photoshop and you're looking at your like comic page,
right,
and you're sort of whatever about it,
right,
it's going to be hard to sell it.
Renovate or detonate.
Yeah. So it's like
throw it away, start over.
But then it's like, everything is, there's such a dichotomy to all of this stuff.
Right.
So it's like, don't be so in love with it that you don't see its flaws.
Right.
But yet, but make sure you're in love with it.
Yeah, right.
If that makes sense,
right.
And that's another one of those things where like, I think that's a hard thing to teach. You just sort of do it, and you realize like when I can't tell you how many times I went to Charlotte Bellin's office.
Oh yeah, she's an instructor. She runs the animation department at CC.
Yeah. And I pestered her all the time.
Yeah.
And I would go in there repeatedly all the time with a new drawing, a new sketch, a new painting, a new whatever. This one's awesome. This one is next level. And she would look at it and go, bang, 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 and fill it all these holes. And I would just like, I would just laugh, and I would just like, like she just murdered another one. But I would go back and I would do it again. And we had a really good, she was like somebody I trusted.
Yeah.
So she was never just filling it with holes.
Yeah.
She was building like that, building that bridge to the next painting that gets better. And it's not always fun, because you kind of think you got something there, and then it's like, what? That is better.
Yeah.
But it's not there.
Yeah.
So that gets back, I guess, to that trust thing. Who are you bouncing it off of?
Right, and that's one of the advantages to taking a class.
Yeah.
Because it's like, this isn't about making a masterpiece right now. Maybe you will make a masterpiece.
Yeah.
I think it's like month one. I tell my Magic Box students like this. If you come up with a portfolio piece that's awesome through this assignment, wonderful.
Yeah.
It's a bonus. But you've got to just forget that. You have to be willing to let that go.
Yeah.
Because it's not about making that, and that's not even what we're working toward.
Yeah.
If it happens accidentally, great.
Yeah.
But that's not what we're working toward. What we're working toward right now is getting you to the point where you're equipped enough to be able to paint anything you want to paint.
Yeah.
That's the goal. And so if it means throwing away 20 paintings over the next year and a half, then that's just what you're going to have to do.
I got folders of so many bad paintings.
Yeah.
A lot of them are on my blog, actually.
Yeah, there you go.
Like nice. You said, you got to get it out there. So that arc. is definitely out there.
Right. I think what I mean is seasons are good. It's good to just carve out some time and go, you know what? If I'm always trying to do both things, if I'm always trying to make the portfolio piece, or I'm always trying to make the comic that I'm going to publish, or I'm always trying to make, if it's always a deliverable product, then I'll never have a time where it's just only about growth.
Yeah.
And so it's not always possible, but if you have that ability, if your schedule permits it, if your lifestyle permits it, if you can manage to just make it happen, then that could be great. That can be really effective if you can just go, you know what? I mean, that's what Dave Raposa did. You know, he just, I think it was like a year, he just carved out and just went, this year is about growth. And then, you know, it's like his work is incredible.
That's super brave.
Because
that's super brave.
And it cost him. You know, it cost him, but he made it work. And I'm not saying that everybody should like take a year off and go just, I mean, but it's on the table.
Yeah.
You know, or maybe it is. The point I'm trying to make is that he carved out the time for it to be just about study. And so he was able to go, if none of this makes it into my portfolio, whatever. That's fine. This is just about, right now, it's just about growth. So if you can kind of isolate these things, I think that can be, it can be at least, it can be less confusing. And if it's less confusing, it can be exponentially more effective.
Very freeing.
Yeah.
To be like, it's going to be bad.
Yeah.
You know?
That's why, I mean, when I start my character design process, every single time, I mean, I don't know of a time that I didn't do this when I was at Disney. I would go away for 2 days and I would draw bad on purpose for 2 days. And it was all because of that. It's because I have to detach from this early on so I can see it objectively, so I can be willing to take risks and do something genuinely surprising. You know? And actually, getting back to your whole Champions thing, that was the same deal. It was like, we're working in this world, this universe that we've now had 2 Cars movies, and now we're making a Planes movie. And in the first 2 Cars movies, there are, I don't know, thousands of characters. There's so many characters, and they've done so many ideas so far.
Yeah.
That challenge is very compelling to me. This is really interesting. How do you make how do you make something new in this world that has been explored so thoroughly? And that was part of it. Was just, take risks. Take design risks.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. Don't be afraid.
Don't be afraid. Man, it really does always come back to that, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or it's okay if you're afraid. That's probably a sign that you're in the right place.
Sure.
But
be a little afraid.
Move ahead anyway.
Move ahead be a little afraid.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's all stuff too. Like I feel like, you know, you're talking about experiences that are like well beyond what I have even had so far.
Right.
So that's kind of the kind of stuff that, you know, challenges that I look into my own future. You know, like I said, I mean, it's really cool to be a part of like the ArtCast. Yeah. And you know, it's really interesting, and I think like we talked about prior to this was just like I'm at an interesting place. Yeah. A place that a lot of other students are going to identify with. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That transition. But there's so much like learning and growing as an artist that like, I mean, I'm on here as a total like noob when it comes to, you know, awesome. Like to the life of being an artist and growing and things like that. So
well, it's very clear that you have a tremendous amount to contribute, and I couldn't be more excited about what's to come. I mean, I just, you know, this really is
really nice. Appreciate it.
This is just the tip of the iceberg. You know, it's gonna be good.
I'm excited. Yeah, it's really exciting. I get to go draw all the time. It's you know, and get a paycheck from it. Yeah. Like, woo. Yeah, that's definitely the goal.
At an incredibly reputable studio. Yeah. That's making interesting work.
Yeah.
It's like, it's just so good.
And they're great, and the people I work with are, you know, the environment there is really good, and like I'm excited. Like I'm already getting to that place where I'm like, oh, okay, enough with painting walls. Like I need to go back and like make stuff. I need to go talk to these guys that, you know, I learned so much from. Right. You know, now I've been away from that environment for a couple of weeks, and I'm like, oh, I got to get back to that.
You've got all kinds of new questions.
Yeah. So like it's exciting. That's one of those things too. Is like the learning I think almost accelerates in a weird way because you're so focused and you're doing these things all the time, and you're around guys that everybody loves it.
Oh yeah.
So there's no more have to. Right. I mean, you still have to, but there's no more like it's not pulling teeth. It's like Yeah, guess what? The guy sitting next to you has been thinking about that same design problem for hours, and he would love to talk to you about it. You know what I mean? Like,
that's the.
How did you find your solution? So that's a cool environment to be in. So
there's nothing like a healthy studio environment. Just nothing like it, because it's that same thing. That's something, when people ask me if I miss Disney, it's like, there are aspects. I'm extremely happy doing what I'm doing, and it's hard to imagine. No, it's hard to imagine going back based on how much I feel like I'm just at the beginning of the Oatly Academy and that kind of thing, and I'm just starting to even really feel like we just turned a year old last month, and I feel like I'm only just getting started, which I guess I am. It's only a year. But the point being, there's so much ahead of me that it feels weird to think about going back. So it's not a regret. It's not a thing of I wish I was there. But it is something that I deeply miss, is that sense of you show up and everybody just hits the ground running. They were already running before they walked in the door. That is an amazing, amazing feeling. Whereas now I'm very much on my own in the sense of trying to keep the projects going forward. I have those same kinds of a completely equal measure as far as the inspirational conversations and the victories and that kind of stuff. I have that with my students. But it is different in the sense that the actual project part of it is much more lonely. In that sense. That's but anyway, the point is that there's nothing like the studio environment. There's nothing like that. About everybody is running at 110%.
Right.
It's just.
You walk down the road,
good.
every Cintiq has,
and they want. That's the other thing. It's like everybody wants to have a conversation about it. Everyone wants to talk about it. Everyone's well read. Everyone knows all their painters. You don't have to throw out the name of a painter or somebody and wonder if it's gonna, if their just eyes are gonna glaze over. Like, they're gonna geek out about the, Edgar Payne exhibit you just went to see or what.
Totally.
So that's awesome.
It's awesome. You said it basically. My first taste of it is it's definitely worth it. It's whatever the studio is, whether it's the one you think you wanted like your whole life or not. And that's another thing, is like, from what I understand just from talking to like people that I've been fortunate enough to speak with in the industry, is like, if you find a good studio, don't rush out of there. Like enjoy it, and be there and learn from those guys. And
that's the other thing, is that sense of family and that shared experience and us all working toward that common goal. That's also very different in being alone in this sort of vision for the academy. And so much of what I do is, I've been very deliberate in the last few weeks to counter this feeling in calling in a bunch of friends. And in fact, just today I was on the phone with some buddies who run different kinds of businesses, but they're entrepreneurs as well. And we're sitting down tomorrow actually for lunch to talk through and share the places I'm getting stuck and whatever, and just be like, hey, can you speak to this? And because I realize I've just got to, again, it's circle of trust, right? It's like I'm in a new place, or I've got to find, and get them to start weighing in on, so it's not that we all work at my school and we're trying, it's not that, but it's something similar. It's like still a shared purpose of trying to help each other with our businesses,
No, it's good. I guess, like you said, with trust, like, it's amazing what, like, multiple minds and how fast things can become a reality or can get better. And I think that's another one of those big things too, is like, if you're always working for the project to be better, like, you'll be fine. If you're just like conscientious and a decent human being, and your work, you're willing to look at your work and make changes to make the project better and help other people, assess their own work. Or when they ask for it, give feedback. But feedback is different from like just criticizing.
Right, exactly.
So I think that seems to be like at the heart of it, and it's like I think that is kind of the heart of it, is just that, like, be willing to change your stuff if it's going to make it better. And don't get so attached to things that you don't make changes to plus that, whatever it may be, the painting, the character, whatever. And work on your skills in helping other people see that too. That kind of thing. I feel like that's a big deal, like for the studio environment.
Oh, it's
and
huge.
that'll help you plug in.
That is the studio environment.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that's the gig.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and it's awesome. So yeah.
We'll check back in a couple months or something and just see what else is going on. It'll be great to have you back on the show.
Need people to get over hearing my voice so much.
Yeah,
Sorry,
right.
I talk so much.
Oh man, I've been running into that so much lately because it's like not only am I making the show on the phone all the time with people, but I'm also making all of these Magic Box tutorials. Yeah. So it's like I hear my own voice 50 hours a week. I mean, it's like I am, and so I start to go a little crazy, just feeling like this is all I do is listen to myself. I'm so tired of it. So that's why I've been doing more interviews lately, because I'm like, I called Will Terry last week when we recorded the last episode, and I was just like, dude, please, will you just join me on this show and just be like a guest co-host, because I am so tired of hearing myself. I can't even take it. I was like, just weigh in on this.
Oh man.
All right, dude.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's been, I definitely listen to the ArtCast and admire, your work and the artists and things that you have on here, and I admire the work of many of the artists who I'm sure just like listen to this. Oh. So it's really like pretty wild to be talking here now.
That's awesome.
But I appreciate it. It's awesome.
Great.
Thanks for taking the interest.
Thanks for being on the show. Tell the good people where to find you.
My blog would be the best place. It's I have a Blogspot blog, and it's Stowe's Art. That's STOSART.blogspot.com, and I'm on Twitter, Stowe Campbell, and I have a Tumblr and all that stuff too. But which is also Stowe Campbell. Mm-hmm. So, any of those, if you go to the blog, my Twitter's on there, feel free to check it out. Like I said, there's a lot of boo-boos on that blog, so it's not,
soon to be removed?
Yeah, no, I'll leave it up there.
Let it all hang out.
That's one of those things that I always found so frustrating, is like you've mentioned before, you don't get a chance to see like the bad stuff that led to the good stuff. Right. And maybe someday I'll like sweep all that under the rug. But right. I feel like, in all honesty, like, I don't know. It's so nice when you see a really good artist's not so good stuff, and it just gives you that little. Oh, and I don't mean that I'm a really good artist or anything like that yet. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it like that.
You're emulating what you appreciate.
Yeah.
But you are a really good artist.
So no, I appreciate it.
Let the record show.
Thank you. But that stuff will stay up there.
Yeah.
So
there you go.
Feel free to laugh and point, and all that stuff. So
that's great, man.
Yeah.
Of course, we will link to all of Chris's online presences in the show notes that accompany this podcast episode at chrisoatley.com.
If you are an intermediate digital painter or a beginner who likes to learn quickly by being thrown into the deep end, then I encourage you to enroll in the very first digital painting course offered by the Oatley Academy of Concept Art and Illustration. In true Oatley Academy fashion, it has a snappy title. It's called The Magic Box: Everything I Know About Digital Painting. In The Magic Box, I will show you every workflow, every technique, every time saver, everything I have developed over my past 8 years of professional digital painting experience, including my time as a visual development artist at Disney. The Magic Box will empower and equip you to paint lifelike human and animal characters, to control color, light, and atmosphere, to achieve a professional level of polish and dimension in your work, to avoid overworked paintings and the flat coloring book look forever, to increase your speed and efficiency with versatile techniques that will work in any painting. And of course, to break through the overwhelm of working in Photoshop. Plus, you'll have access to a huge community of passionate, focused artists with whom you can connect and collaborate. So if you want a clear step-by-step method designed specifically for concept artists and illustrators, head to chrisoatley.com/magicbox and enroll today. It's completely risk-free, and you get instant access to the first set of lessons as soon as you enroll. Here are just a few testimonials from current Magic Box students. @John Acuna says, "At Chris Oatley, those lighting tutorials helped me make a major breakthrough today. 2 days of work done in as many hours. Thanks. At Frederick_S says, first time I've looked at a painting I've done and not wanted to scrap it ASAP. Thanks, at Chris Oatley. At Thousandfold Art says, at Chris Oatley, that less lesson changed my life, dude. Hashtag Magic Box. And at Drake Studio says, the Magic Box courses from at Chris Oatley have made me question my entire digital art workflow. The learning, it hurts. Hurts so good. I love you guys. Yes, so head to chrisoatley.com/magicbox to learn more, to enroll, and we would love to see you join the Oatley Academy.
Was exactly at the right time. All of the angels were telling me to pay attention, and all the numbers were standing in line. It was the easiest of days. There was unexpected sunshine, it was all that I could see, and everything was going my way. And I wonder if you had waited till the morning after the night, if you might have seen the same things, you might have seen the same bright light, like a beacon, like a bell. Or maybe it's just as well, wherever you are. There's no way to tell you now. Was an ornament of stars. There was magic that I could not comprehend. There were bells and they were ringing like guitars. Wasn't upside down. I could have cried if I'd thought a little harder, but I was laughing up until I hit the ground. And I know that I'm still standing, though the ground continues to shake. And for all the good I might give, what's more than share that I take? It's a token, it's a shell. Or maybe it's just as well, wherever you are. There's no way to tell you now. How my heart got bigger, I could see you better. Oh, my heart got bigger, I could see you better. Oh, my heart got bigger, I could see you better. I love all of my girlfriends, not in that way, but they were friends and they were girls. And I was troubled by the world of men, and I spent far too many days misguided misdirection of the heart. And it took some time to